Under Mikel Arteta and Edu, Arsenal have been transformed into title challengers over the last couple of years. Obviously, Edu has now announced that he's going to be leaving. Is that going to cause a problem for Arsenal, do you think, James?
Yeah, it's a big issue because, sometimes, Edu was quite sort of public facing, but quite often these sporting directors don't have much of a public profile. And I think quite often fans sort of wonder what they do really outside of windows and, just negotiating transfers. But, Edu joined the club. Obviously, he'd been a player, legend and invincible at the club previously as a midfielder. He came back in 2019. He started as a technical director. He ended up being promoted to being a sporting director. And the reason why this is a big problem for Arsenal is that he was the first ever person to hold both of those positions at the club. Part of that is obviously down to the autonomy that Arsene Wenger had and the structure that existed for a long time before Unai Emery came in to succeed him in 2018. But also, it's significant that both him and Mikel Arteta have grown in their respective roles together. So, as I say, Edu started as technical director. Mikel Arteta, when he was appointed, was specifically made head coach, which obviously was a departure from what Arsene Wenger had been as manager before. And the pair of them kind of grew organically in those roles over time. And one of the big issues for them is that it didn't operate like a top club normally does. So the manager would habitually report into the sporting director, who would then go to the chief executive. My information about how it used to work with Edu is that both Mikel Arteta and Edu would separately report into the chief executive. And that worked because they had a good working relationship. They both got on. They felt they could be honest with each other. But that is not normal. And when you're going out to market to try and get a new sporting director, you're essentially asking them to do one of two things. You're either saying, we want you to come in to fit to the existing role, which means that you don't have the autonomy over a manager that you would expect to have as a typical sporting director. Or you say to them, okay, we want you to come in and be the boss. And then you're saying to Mikel Arteta, we're kind of clipping your wings a little bit. And, Arteta is, if I call him a control freak, I mean that in a positive way. He's obsessed with detail. He's very meticulous. He wants information about every decision. He wants to be part of the decision-making process right up to the very highest level. And of course, the irony of this is that by extension, he is going to be part of the team that effectively appoints his boss, if that's the way they choose to go with it, if they want to bring a sporting director in who does sit above the manager in the conventional way. So they're going to follow a due process. They don't have a succession plan. It was a real shock to a lot of the staff when Edu announced that he was leaving. And I do think it's going to create a real issue in terms of the dynamic of how they move forward as a club.
So why did Arsenal, or maybe they did, why did they not try harder to keep him? Arsenal are one of the biggest clubs in Europe. We've heard that Eddie might be going to work with, Marinakis, the Nottingham Forest owner, his group of clubs. I'd imagine that although that group of clubs is quite an interesting group of clubs, it's not Arsenal. So why would he be so tempted to leave to go to it seems to be a sideways move at best?
Well, the cynical answer is money. Yeah. He's we understand that he's trebled his money to go to take up this new role. It's not been formally announced, but that is the expectation that that's what he's going to go and do. He's on a 6-month gardening leave period, so it won't happen until next year now. Officially, they try to argue that the multi-club model is more attractive because it's a bigger proposition. So you're obviously dealing with 3 clubs and trying to grow a wider brand. I'm not sure I really buy into that. I sort of think if you've done all the hard work that they have at Arsenal, you think about the churn of players, paying off contracts to get rid of guys they didn't want there. They've done all the hard yards. They've got themselves to the brink of winning the Premier League. There may be 1 or 2 players short of that. You'd think, well, why would you not see that through? But I don't know whether part of it also is that he might have just thought, well, maybe this club has gone as far as it can. Maybe I've got to a point where I'm not sure there's too much more I can give, and there's not another level that we can go to. And Vinay Venkatesham left the chief executive role at the end of last season, and the sort of music around that was that he just felt there's never a great time to go out, right? Normally, chief executives, sporting directors, they're kind of hounded out of the club because the situation's a mess and the fans want a head on the chopping block, as it were. Vinay left with Arsenal in a fantastic position. Edu could equally say, well, look, I've left at a point where the club has come so far in these 5 years that there's not anywhere else for you need to go.
It sounds a little bit like when Michael Edwards left Liverpool 2 or 3 years ago. Michael Edwards and Jurgen Klopp, both massive parts of the success that Liverpool had. bigger and better success than Arsenal have had, by the way. You know, Arsenal is still kind of trying to build towards that. But to the point where you've got a great coach and you've got a great technical director, sporting director, whereby they both want to be the guy in control. And ultimately, it tends to be the coach, because the coach is the front-facing guy who, if you're winning, then the coach is winning, the team's winning, so the coach is the genius. And obviously Liverpool had that with Edwards and Klopp. It's interesting that Klopp left and Michael Edwards came back. Now, is it a case of Edu and Mikel Arteta whereby they've both just grown in the role so much that they really can't work alongside each other?
Yeah, I don't think it got to that point, but I was told that there was a disagreement about signing Mikel Merino from Real Sociedad this summer, and Arteta felt that he was a player that they needed to boost the experience in the squad, to balance the squad in midfield, give them extra numbers in there. And I was told that Edu and a number of the other senior figures at the club weren't convinced about the valuation, about just his overall quality. They ended up obviously doing that deal. And I'm not suggesting there was a big falling out about it, but I think it may have exposed a few fault lines in terms of, you know, who has the final say about transfers and identifying targets and ultimately obviously getting players over the line. But, you know, again, my information was that at the end of the window, there was a conversation between Edu and the senior hierarchy to sort of talk about his role and whether there was any further evolution. And I think the club sort of reacted to that to sort of say, well, you're a sporting director. I mean, where do you go from here, really? What else do you want? Arsenal technically are part of a multi-club system in that the Cronkies obviously own other clubs. They own the Colorado Rapids, the Denver Nuggets, if you switch sports, but you know they don't operate it like that. They've only ever done one transfer between their two football clubs, and it didn't work out particularly well. So, you know, they don't operate in that way. So there isn't really a promotion, as you like.
It's interesting though, because
to go to
that relationship between coach and sporting director, it's becoming more visible and more kind of newsworthy now. You know, Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell had issues at the start of the season at Newcastle. We've seen Chelsea. You know, they've got kind of two sporting directors, and the coaches that have come and gone at Chelsea in the past 18 months have had various different issues with those. Arteta and Edu, we'll see what happens at Man United with Amorim and the structure there. But I think the one interesting one as well is, you know, Pep Guardiola and Chiqui Begiristain, probably the most successful double act in football in the last 10 years. But obviously Chiqui's leaving to be replaced by Hugo Viana, who from Sporting. Maybe Pep will stick around to work with him, we don't know. But it's a really important relationship now in the club, isn't it? The sporting director and the manager.
Well, it is because it's also, you've got two, you know, major guys at clubs who have got opposing needs. You talk about that the Marino transfer in the summer. You've got Edu, who's probably looking long term and thinking we need a younger guy, a younger profile. And Mikel Arteta, who's looking at the squad and thinking, if I'm going to win the title after 2 years finishing second, it's going to be now. I need the win now guy. So you've got two, you know, major players in these clubs who are basically fighting each other, aren't they, about what their kind of aim is. And I imagine there's quite a lot of worry at Arsenal at the moment that you kind of on an upward curve towards winning the title, and you remove one of the big players out of that success. Yeah,
a lot of people you speak to at Arsenal, they talk about Edu being really important for the culture and the values that the club tries to uphold. I've been told by multiple people that if there was ever a dispute at the training ground, you know, over whatever it was, allocation of resources or an issue between staff or whatever it was, Edu would be the one who would sort that out. He was a really good sort of people person. He was a firefighter. You know, he's charming, he's gregarious on camera, he knows a lot of people, he's got that sort of ebullient personality. They're losing a lot with him behind the scenes, not just what you'd expect at the business end of a window.
So you mentioned before that you called Mikel Arteta a control freak in a positive sense, but this change, does that make him have more control, and is that dangerous?
Well, he is part of a team along with Richie Garlick, who's the managing director, with Tim Lewis, one of the board members, and obviously Josh Kroenke, who will, you know, make the sort of final decision on that on behalf of the Kroenke family, who are going to vet the candidates for Edu's successor. Now, it does feel a little unnatural, a little awkward that you're going to have a manager effectively influencing the decision over somebody who should be his boss. Now, if Arsenal choose to go a different way with it, and they kind of say to a sporting director, well, you're not going to be the manager's boss, which Edu wasn't really because of the structure that I've already explained, that does make it a lot less appealing to certain sporting directors who are used to working in the conventional way.
And any kind of removal of a key person out of the structure creates a power vacuum, doesn't it? And that when there's a power vacuum, there's people who think that maybe they can extend their area of influence, and it all becomes it muddies the waters, doesn't it? If you've got two guys like Edu and Arteta who have got very clearly defined remits, when you remove one of them, it's natural that there are other people inside the club who think, well, I can maybe get a bit of that, and or Arteta thinks, well, I can maybe increase my influence. It does sound a little bit worrying for Arsenal, given how much success they've had over the last sort of couple of years. And you said there about doing the hard yards, that you just reach the point where you look like you're about to cash in almost, and then you've got this major problem and major issues to solve.
Yeah, and if you're Mikel Arteta, you're not likely to accept somebody coming in and saying, well, this is now my area. I now have final say over transfers. I now am going to whistle down the targets. I'm now going to go and meet the players first. Or, whatever the areas in which Arteta and Edu kind of traded off to work together and in that kind of unconventional structure, it's going to be difficult for Arteta to go back to a conventional structure, having grown into the sort of really quite powerful position he's in now at Arsenal.
So it seems like the next big signing at Arsenal could be an off-the-field signing, and it could be extremely influential as to how Mikel Arteta works and how much success he brings to the club.